Helen Zille has opened up about the DA's infighting, as well as other critical issues leading up to the local elections later this year. Here's what happened. So Helen Zille took to Talk 702 in order to speak about, first of all, the recent infighting that's happened within the DA, specifically between leader John Steenhuisen and former member Deon George, as well as certain other issues, including Starlink, how her ministers are performing, and of course the upcoming municipal election. And this was a very interesting chat because ultimately she was willing to come on air for the first time since a lot of these controversies, such as that between Steenhuisen and Deon George, happened, and actually face the press and address the issue. And so we're going to have a look at whether or not she is correct in a lot of her assessments and generally just how she performed during this interview. But before we get into it, could I please just remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's entirely free, and all you have to do is click the subscribe button below the video. Furthermore, if you would like to enjoy some additional benefits and support the channel, then consider becoming a Power Club member. You can do so by clicking the join button below. Now let's get into the video. Alright, so this video is quite a lengthy one, and so because of that, we're not going to play the entire thing, but rather the first half of the interview, because the second half is really just Helen taking questions from viewers who sent their questions through to the radio station. So it's not very controversial, but if you do want to take a look at the entire interview, make sure to head on over to YouTube. You can find it on Radio 702, or just Google Helen Zille and you'll see it pretty near the top of the search results. That being said, let's get into it and see what Helen Zille had to say.
Start our conversation with Helen Zille, who is the DA's federal chair. We're going to be discussing the party's road to the 2026 local government elections. And I always want to create a platform for you to engage with these leaders, especially ahead of crucial elections like what we have this year. So please take up the opportunity if you have got some questions for Helen, if you've got some inputs, maybe you've got some suggestions around what she needs to be focusing on. Should she somehow win and become the new mayor of Johannesburg, and the DA gets the necessary votes for that? The number to dial if you want to join the conversation is 011-883-0702. You can send your WhatsApps as well on 072-7021-702. Helen, welcome to the show. It's good to have you in the studio in Johannesburg. Actually, I've never had you in a studio in Joburg. I've had you in Cape Town. So welcome.
Well, I'm now a Joburger. I'm here. And it's lovely to be with you, and Happy New Year to all the listeners, and Happy New Year to you.
How often do you travel between the two places? Are you mostly based here in Johannesburg?
Yes, I'm based here in Johannesburg. I am based here in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is now home.
Yeah.
My husband didn't want to move to Joburg. He's very integrated in his church. Is he waiting for you
to fix it first?
He's very integrated in his church life and his social life, in all the things that he does. And so he wanted to stay there. So I will pop down once a month to see him.
Yeah.
And then obviously to see my grandchildren as well.
Yeah.
But I am based here in Joburg.
Okay. I want to say from the onset that, of course, we had requested to have a conversation with you about a week or so ago. And as discussed, you've indicated that you don't really want to get into the Deon George, John Steenhuisen matter because I imagine the FLC is still investigating. When are we expecting them to finish that investigation? Because the leadership conference is coming up in April.
Yes, the federal executive has said that this investigation must take absolute priority. And that means that all other matters that the FLC may be investigating have to sit on the back burner while this investigation is conducted and concluded.
And is it only focusing though on John? Or because
no,
Deon is now out?
Well, yes, Deon has now resigned, which takes him out of the ambit of the DA's Federal Legal Commission, which is unfortunate, but nevertheless, the process continues into allegations relating to John.
Okay.
So just before we continue, it's important for us to note that while he was still within the DA, there was a gag order placed on Deon George, and so he wasn't able to speak out publicly. Now, the reason why he was able to have his explosive ENCA interview where he read out his resignation letter and cited the reasons why is because he'd already left the party at that time. And so he was no longer under the jurisdiction of the Federal Council of the DA. But I think it's very important that before we continue, we need to take a sober look at events. So Deon George made a lot of serious allegations, speaking about how the DA will stay in the GNU at any cost. They've become puppets basically of the ANC and other criminality. He spoke about John Steenhuisen and his so-called inability to lead and his financial issues. And we need to remember that on one hand, it's possible that what Deon George is saying could be true, because after all, he was the head of the finance committee of the DA and very clearly had first-hand knowledge of what was going on in the party at the most upper echelons. Still, on the other hand, we need to remember that he is a disgruntled ex-member. He had his fallout. And so as much as there is a chance that maybe what he's saying is correct, there is also the chance that he's leaning into a lot of the rumors around the DA that are spread by other people and have basically taken advantage of this. And he's decided to pretty much relay them himself and give weight to them because he has a bone to pick with the party. And so while it's entirely possible that he could be telling the truth, it's possible that he could be distorting facts or even lying about the DA as well. So it's very important for us to keep this in mind before we jump to conclusions.
I want to talk about that conference, Helen, and whether you think this kind of tit for tat somehow sort of affects the organization, especially, let's start with maybe the elections. Tony Leon wrote an opinion piece this week and was suggesting that this battle within the party is a distraction in what should be a watershed election year for the party. Do you agree with this, that this tit for tat could have an impact on the organization?
Well, internal conflict is always destabilizing. It always distracts us from our main goal.
Uh-huh.
But I think that we can bring this to a close and we can move on from there. Unfortunately, in any political party, things are often very smooth and run well, but now and again, you're going to get a conflict.
Mm.
And because politicians are so in the limelight, in the public eye, the subject of media speculation and media reporting, these conflicts can't go under the radar as they do in most other organizations. So I'm sure, for example, in Prime Media or anywhere else, there are also conflicts. But when you're a politician, everything is right out there. And because we're human, we deal with them. In the DA, we have institutions that deal with them. We have something called the Federal Legal Commission. We have something called a Federal Executive. And my role is to make sure they work properly. And if they don't work properly, to make sure that what is wrong is fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I am doing.
Mm. How would you describe the party's internal stability and leadership right now?
Well, in the DA, we have got a very solid machine. So we have got all the departments, and I can list them all. I mean, there's obviously the by-elections department, there's the elections, there's the communications, there's the marketing, there's the fundraising, there's the policy, all of these. I probably haven't mentioned a whole lot, but there are all of these. They're very well structured and they are functioning extremely well. They've got good leadership and the machine carries on. So right around the country, in every single province, in every single region, the machine is buzzing. It is well in advance of the preparations for the election. The selection panels are already sitting in some parts of the country to select our candidates. The machine goes on. We call it the blue machine. It is oiled, it is geared, and it is functional. It can weather many, many storms as it has in the past. So the machine never gets involved in this. And that is why the party can continue and flourish despite the occasional upheaval.
Do even battles like what we've seen not divide the leadership of the organization?
No, we try. Well, anybody who's a professional staff member in the DA may not, as a condition of their employment, may not get involved in these battles. So it's a condition of their employment that they focus on the job that they've got, and that they never get involved in internal politics.
Mhm.
So in most of the provinces, for example, and elsewhere in the party, people are getting on with their jobs.
Yeah. I want to talk about the GNU, and we'll talk about the city of Johannesburg, and I will dedicate a lot of time on just making sure the listeners engage with you. With the GNU, what is the status right now? Is there, would you say, growing discomfort with the organization's position in the GNU? I don't know if you saw what Khaleb Kachalia wrote the other day, and he was suggesting that there's growing unease within the party about its participation within the GNU. And of course, Dion was trying to suggest that the DA is willing to do anything to stay in the government of national unity.
Look, to be honest, you must just look at the things we've done to see if that is true. We took a very strong stand on the BBBEE legislation. And if we were going to be towing the ANC's line, we wouldn't have done that. We have taken a very strong internal position on, for example, international relations issues with which we've disagreed with the ANC.
I do have to mention at this point that although the DA has done this, they've also proven a little bit untrustworthy in this regard as well. So a few days ago, Gayton McKenzie, the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture, decided to take down an art exhibit at the Venice Biennale for South Africa because of alleged foreign intervention, specifically from Qatar, because the piece that was being commissioned had nothing to really do with South Africa. It was more of like this pro-Palestine, anti-Israel piece. And he said, listen, this is pushing for another country's interests, foreign interests. It's not South African interests. We're going to scrap this. So then what did the DA do? Well, rather than standing by a lot of their foreign policy stances that they've had to date, they decided to turn on McKenzie and the Patriotic Alliance. They decided to call him out, saying that he didn't follow procedure, take him to the public protector. Now, all of that aside, this is a very big problem because ultimately, if the DA is so against the foreign policy of the ANC, as they say, then why are they attacking other people who are on the same side as them? It really doesn't make much sense politically. And people can argue about, oh, well, the process wasn't followed or something like that. But ultimately, as far as I can see from my own research, there's no actual grounds for this. He didn't break any laws. He is in charge of the department. It's his discretion. Not even the ANC complained, and they're probably the biggest anti-Israel people there are. So I really do have to call out the DA on this one. I think it's a very poor political choice, and we've seen that the more they alienate these rival parties of theirs, the more they end up driving voters to those parties and away from the DA.
You'll remember the big fight that we had over value-added tax. We've had many, many fights, and apart from that, we are in court on a whole range of issues, from the NHI to expropriation without compensation against the ANC. So,
okay, again, I hate to stop the video so soon, but when she's mentioning the court issues, look, big props to the DA for that. Of course, you want to make sure that destructive laws are challenged, but at the same time, that's not really proving why you're a good GNU partner or that you're effective in the GNU, because that's something that you could have done in opposition as well, which the DA has done. So I just don't feel like Helen Zille is really answering the question well at this point. But let's see, maybe she'll redeem herself with some interesting points coming up.
if we were trying to suck up to the ANC to stay in government, we wouldn't be doing any of those things. So I really do believe that we are in the government, but as long as the ANC does not act as if we're a coalition and acts as if they are an independent party governing alone, we will continue to be an opposition within the government of national unity.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you think you've successfully been able to influence within the GNU?
Look, I'm not a spokesperson for the GNU, and I can't speak for the GNU. But in every single portfolio, there have been extraordinary strides. And I'm saying this from the outside because I'm not a spokesperson and I'm not inside the GNU. In fact, I'm in the party, not the state. And we respect the distinction between the party and the state. But like every other South African, I see the huge progress in home affairs. This is progress that the country hasn't been able to make for 30 years. And the digitization of a lot of the processes, the tightening up of borders, the use of drones to prevent illegal crossings of the borders, and a range of other things, the eradication of corruption, the cases against corrupt officials, all of those have happened in the year and a bit that we've been in the GNU. And they've made a big difference. Lots of people will tell you, and that is why with the e-visa system, for example, we can have a record tourism year. And of course, you were also in Cape Town. You would have seen how many international visitors there were.
Okay, I have to take a very big issue with this. So there are two things that Helen mentioned that I need to call out. First of all, she spoke about tightening the borders. Secondly, she spoke about the e-visas. So with regards to tightening the borders, it is true that the implementation of drone surveillance and stuff has actually helped. I know that at a point the DA released a press release saying that the illegal border crossings were basically being stopped by about 200% more than what they were before it started. So definitely, good work over there. We do know that there are a lot of other areas of progress that they've been. So for example, bringing these Home Affairs branches to banks and making sure that people don't have to go to those long lines at Home Affairs, rather doing their passport renewals and stuff like that at their bank branches and stuff. It's all very good. But ultimately, we need to acknowledge that there are some areas of downfall as well. The arrival of the Palestinian flights late last year are a sore spot for the DA and for the government as a whole. I've done countless videos on that. I've spoken about it quite extensively, so I don't want to go further into that. But basically, they thought that the people were not asylum seekers. Then they said, no, they might be. It was a whole conundrum full of misunderstanding, misinformation, lack of information of who the people were. And so I would be very careful when saying, oh, we're tightening the border, because very clearly there have been instances of people getting through. Now moving on to the e-visa issue. So the e-visas that Helen's speaking about could improve tourism, and I'm very glad if that's the case. But the problem is, it is a security issue for the country, and I'm going to explain why. So I went onto the Department of Home Affairs website. I'm busy reading it right now. And if you take a look at the e-visa system, the countries that the e-visa is applicable in are quite varied, let's say. There are some more developed and safe countries, but there are also a lot of dangerous countries on the list. And this is very problematic because ultimately, when you have visa waiver programs or e-visa programs, it's basically trying to make it easier for people to be able to come into the country. And if you're worried about border security, the only sort of countries you should really be allowing e-visas from are ones where you're sure that it's a safer population, where you have a lower risk of crime, drug trafficking, criminal syndicates, terrorism flowing into the country. But if I look on the Home Affairs website, we can take a look at some of these countries and it's quite problematic. So one of the countries where there's e-visa availability is Albania. Now, people who live in places like Belgium and the Netherlands know that there are a lot of Albanian migrants who've come in and they're part of crime syndicates, particularly when it comes to trafficking different substances. That is a problem. Algeria in North Africa is somewhat of a stable place, but again, there is an Islamic issue over there. If we scroll down, Belarus is a partner of Russia. I don't quite know why you would want to make it easier for Belarus to be able to come to South Africa, because after all, there could be people who are militant with regards to the war going on right now. We take a look at countries like the Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Congolese people. There are a lot of Congolese migrants in South Africa, some who are legal, others who are illegal. Egypt, not the greatest place to allow an e-visa. They do have very strong Muslim Brotherhood presence there, and by extension, terrorist links. If we scroll a bit further down, okay, so now you've got countries like Germany, which are more stable. India's becoming a lot more stable. Saudi Arabia, which is a Middle Eastern country, but very stable. The people coming from there are pretty wealthy. There's not going to be much of a concern of them going home. But then look at this. You've got Iran. And we all know what's going on in Iran. I really don't know why you would make it easier for Iranians to come in, because yes, there are a lot of good Iranians, but there could also be those who are linked to the regime. And so overall, having this e-visa system where you're kind of opening up for everybody is not a good thing. I would rather have fewer tourists and better security, but that's just my opinion.
And that's all made easier by a smoother functioning of Home Affairs and the e-visa system. So a revolution actually in Home Affairs. In public works, we've had the major onslaught against the construction mafia, with arrests, with people being charged, and with a lot of protection for major construction projects so that they are not disrupted by extortionists who come onto the premises and force themselves to get a part of the resources involved in that building. Then we've had Solly Malatsi in communication. Now, it's crucially important that we get free internet access for the millions and millions of people that don't have it in South Africa. And Solly Malatsi has made that his number one priority. I mean, you and me, Clement, can't imagine life without the internet now. It's almost become, in this modern world, a human right to have access to the internet. And the digital divide is created primarily by lack of access. And that is what Solly Malatsi is trying to deal with. Siviwe Gwachube has got one of the most challenging portfolios, unbelievably difficult. Fixing the education system, because I was MEC for education for a while. Mm-hmm. Fixing the education system is one of the biggest challenges in South Africa. She's put herself into it heart and soul, starting with preschool and the foundation phase to get kids literate and numerate at the right level, at the right age, so that they can begin the rest of their schooling. And she's focusing on that relentlessly, apart from infrastructure issues like getting rid of pit toilets. So all of these things that the ANC hasn't been able to do for forever are things that the DA ministers are fixing in their own portfolios.
Is that fair to say, though, Helen? I mean, at some point you must acknowledge that these departments were not vacant before these ministers from the DA occupied them. So there are some projects that were started by ANC ministers. They may have stalled, but to suggest that the ANC didn't do anything at all and the DA ministers arrived and magically somehow they started making progress isn't necessarily
so this guy's
true.
just taking words out of Helen Zille's mouth. There was absolutely nothing wrong with anything Helen said. And to answer you, pal, she's absolutely right with what she said, because even a little bit of progress under the DA is better than absolutely zero progress over 30 years under the ANC. I know people are going to come at me and say, oh, but they fixed this little thing or that little thing. Doesn't matter. The country's suffering thanks to the ANC's rule. And ultimately, even if the DA only does 5% of what they promised or 2% of what they promised, it's still better than the ANC's progress. So, Helen is justified.
Well, Clement, if you can give me one example of one
trains.
thing.
Let's take pit toilets. NG Motshekga started this project many years ago. At some point, it was at 60%. It was at 75%. Sivuyo Gwachube comes through and announces that progress has been made. This is after 6 months of her joining that office. There's no way that she's been able to eradicate pit latrines. And then
actually, there is a possibility, because ultimately, it's not 100% complete, sure, but the ANC's always worked at a snail's pace. Just because the ANC is so terribly bad at everything they do doesn't mean that everybody else is useless as well. We've seen it, for example, when Helen Zille first got into Cape Town with that massive coalition in the city council. People were saying, Cape Town is struggling, the ANC's mismanaged the place, it's terrible, whatever. Now, whether people like them or not, the DA have made Cape Town into probably the most developed metro, at least in South Africa. So let's not go and pretend that, oh, just because the ANC took a long time to finish something, that the DA have to take just as long. Because ultimately the standard is so low with the ANC that honestly, probably most other political parties could work faster, let alone the DA.
Look what DA ministers can do. And I think it's okay to actually say, oh, Angie Motshekga started the process. We came in and we want to expedite it.
We will have no problem doing that. But pit latrines are a function of physical infrastructure. The substance of that department is improving learning outcomes. Now, obviously, we want all our students to be able to go to school in dignity and not have pit latrines. Absolutely. That is correct. And if Angie Motshekga started it, and I'm not too sure what progress she made, and I could investigate it, obviously we give credit.
She has eradicated a lot of them since she started.
I give credit where credit is due, always. But let me just say this, on the substantive issues, getting children literate and numerate, getting free basic internet to all South Africans, those kinds of things, I'd be very interested to hear which of those major substantive projects the ANC made progress on.
Well, take the 88% pass rate. Your party released a statement celebrating that. Where do you think that comes from? Sivuya Kahubi didn't magically change the entire system within a year of her being minister. Angie Motshekga started that.
Yeah, 88% pass rate, but that's still pretty shocking because ultimately, if you look at the level of matric, that you've got certain subjects where you need as little as 30% to pass, that's not impressive. Sorry to say, but 88% is not good enough, and the matric pass rates are not good enough. So Clement is just making a terrible argument, in my opinion.
Well, you will note that I didn't mention the 88% pass rate as one of the issues when you asked me.
Why?
Because that is a cumulative thing.
What do you mean?
A cumulative thing. So it happens over time. Obviously, it's a school level prestatie, as they say in Afrikaans. It's a school level achievement. And I think most of the kudos has to go to schools, to parents, to learners, and especially principals and teachers, and then also district management. That is a lot of kudos. So
it can go to the minister who oversees.
No, I'm going to disagree with what Helen Zille is going to say here. No, it absolutely does not go to the minister. I understand Helen wants to be nice. She wants to be cordial. She's got to work with people in the ANC. But in what world did they ever help anything? Ultimately, if you take a look, if you were a school student here in South Africa, specifically over the last few years, you're pretty much on your own. Your school will help you. You may be able to get extra lessons. You may be able to have good teachers, but ultimately the government doesn't help you. I know when I was in school, never did a government minister come visit the school, check it out, look how they can help us. If ever there were delays in getting textbooks, they didn't ever fix them. They didn't do anything. So yeah, I'm giving the ANC a big fat 0% credit when it comes to this. Absolutely zero.
The minister. Absolutely, it can go to the minister. But I'm saying that that's a whole team effort. A whole team effort.
Yeah.
But I know that this has been incremental over a long time. And you will also know that we have questioned the question of quantity over quality. So what we critically have to look at is how many students are doing subjects like mathematics, for example. That's very, very important for access to jobs in this new world. We don't know how many careers will be left after AI has been in. I mean, maybe your job could be taken over by AI, Clement, who knows?
Yeah, any job could be.
So,
even yours.
Well, I sometimes think that mine would be a bit.
There'll be an AI political party one day.
But we'd love to see that. Anyway, the point is that these things are incremental, but I'm talking about the big, big new things, and those were the things that I mentioned primarily.
Okay, let's talk about Soli Malatsi as well.
I can't talk about the GNU. I've given you some examples, but
I'm
not
the GNU.
The spokesperson for the GNU.
No,
Clement.
I've also asked you a question from the DA perspective, so I don't need you to speak for the GNU, but similarly so, when I have the president on this show, I ask him about, as an ANC, are you happy with your deployees? So are you happy with the work ANC ministers
Well, he
are
is
doing?
the president, so he is in government.
Yeah, or any other minister of the ANC. I do want to know how they think the GNU is doing as the ANC part of it. So I'm asking you, you are the federal chair of the Democratic Alliance. You spoke about the issue of internet and how important it is. We need to improve access. And when you look at what the Minister of Communications is doing through Starlink, there are questions around why he would want to allow for someone like Elon Musk to come and operate in South Africa without wanting to comply with regulatory laws, which require telecommunications companies to have at least 30% of ownership by historically
Oh, wow. I
disadvantaged
wonder.
groups.
Geez, that's a hard one. I know. Maybe because he doesn't want to give away a third of his company that he worked hard to build. In what world does it make any sense? Okay, let's just remove ourselves from the South African context. Let's just be logical people and think anywhere in the world. You've got a company and somebody says, listen, in order to operate in this market, you've got to give away a third of your company that you've worked hard to build. These people have done absolutely nothing. They're just taking a third of your company away because they're a different skin tone to you. Does that make any logical sense? Is that just? Does that make any sense financially? Does it make the place or the specific market you're investing in any more investable? The answer is a big fat no. And so ultimately, yes, Elon Musk absolutely has a point when it comes to this. You can like him, you can dislike him. I'm not talking about his character or his situation. It's just on the ground when you're trying to see if something's investable or uninvestable, the answer is pretty clear in this regard.
What is the DA's position on that? Are you comfortable with Elon Musk?
This is not about Elon Musk only. As Solly has said time and time again, he wants to open the market to competition, to access, so that people can get internet at the lowest possible price, because it is so crucial in the modern world. So the first point is that it's not only about Elon Musk. The second point is that equity equivalents have been there forever. They are in the MTBPS, that medium-term budget policy statement, has the role of equity equivalents in there. Mm-hmm. They are well established as a concept in South Africa, that you can do things that meet your BEE requirements that don't involve giving away a share of your company against your will. So there are lots of other things like job creation, like subcontractors, like all of those things that can meet the equity equivalence without pushing people to give up a third.
So I really like what Helen has to say here, because she's really thinking outside of the box. She's saying, well, if you want to meet these equity requirements, which many of us don't agree with, but hey, if they law, they law. If you have to meet them, why not meet them in other ways? You don't necessarily have to push a person out of ownership or dilute their share in the company because they're the wrong skin tone. And so I think it's a very important point that she makes here. I'm just going to let her finish before I continue.
Now, if you're saying anybody who has to invest in South Africa has to give up a third of their company, you can absolutely see why that dries up foreign investment. And they say, well, we won't invest in South Africa. It's a tiny market, no skin off our nose, and we won't invest there. Now, we need international investment. We desperately need it. We need it for competition. We need it to bring down prices. We need it for all of those things. Mm-hmm. And if you say you've got to give up a third of your company to a politically connected person in the ANC elite, because that's always what it is, just now the ANC falls from power, and then what? The minute you start doing favors for politicians in patronage networks, it's the end of your business.
That's an excellent point that Helen makes, but just backtracking on the point I wanted to complete. So what's really important is that she explained that internet is becoming increasingly vital in people's lives. We really can't survive without it. And if you look at the statistics in South Africa, over 70% of the country, some say about 75%, have access to mobile internet, so off their smartphone. And people might say, well, that is very good. But in reality, there's another way to read it, which is that around a quarter of the country does not. There's a much smaller amount of people who have home broadband. I think it was around 15 to 18%, according to which report you read. But ultimately, these are worrying figures because in most of the sort of more developed countries, you're closer to 99%, where really only those in abject poverty or maybe people who are living off the grid don't have internet access. It's a really vital thing these days. We pretty much do everything off our phones, from banking to communication. And ultimately, if new network providers can come into the country, there's a lot of people who say, oh, it might be more expensive to have Starlink, it might be cheaper. Doesn't matter. More competition means that you will have competition in terms of prices as well. And so maybe there will be certain options that are more affordable that come through. It's just how economics works, because ultimately, when you have a similar offering and you're fighting for the same market share, somehow you need to be able to convince consumers that your product provides them with more value for money than the competitor.
Mm-hmm.
So they know that, and they're not going to do that. And the DA is, in any case, against that policy. We believe in having people who invest, create more jobs, encourage small business, improve education, improve skills development. All of those equity equivalents, we're completely in favor of that. But to say to a foreign investor, you must hand over a third of your company to some cadre in the ANC is something we absolutely reject.
Yeah, but it's not some cadre in the ANC.
It is. Tell me where it isn't.
Are you suggesting to me now that any other multinational company that's ever come to this country has given 30% of their ownership to a cadre in the ANC?
Well, I can't think of any exceptions. I mean,
then the statement you make is
let
unfair.
me tell you. No, let me tell you.
Because they're serious. I suppose, I'll give you a chance. The point I'm trying to make, Helen, is there are serious business people out there that are not cadres of the ANC who equally have their own businesses that they have started legitimately. And just because that they've once voted for an organization doesn't necessarily mean that you then brand them as an ANC cadre. So I think it's an unfair statement to make. You can suggest that there are some cases where that's become the case. I absolutely agree with you, but not on all cases.
Well, William Gumede, Professor Gumede, did that study. And he concluded that deal, that part of giving up a third of your company, had circulated about R1 trillion amongst 100 people. And most of them had ANC connections. Now, I haven't seen the research that backs up that conclusion.
He hasn't provided it.
But I
know
a
lot of people asked him to provide the research and how he went about it. But he wasn't able to defend that.
But let me just say this to you. There are some very famous cases. Baleka Mbete getting that money on the Goldfields deal, facilitated by Gayton McKenzie, as I recall. They said to Goldfields, you can't have a license unless you give so much to this person and so much to that person. Now, that was pure extortion, and it was found to be in America. But here, it's legalized by BEE laws, which actually legalizes a lot of what other countries view as pure corruption.
To do what?
To say that you're not going to get your license unless you pay an ANC cadre many millions of rands.
That's not what the law says, Helen.
Well, that's what was absolutely covered by it. So Jacob Zuma said to me, personally, let me just say, that is what the law says, actually, but
it doesn't say ANC cadre.
No, it doesn't say ANC cadre,
yeah.
But it effectively is used through powerful people for ANC cadres.
Yeah,
so when I said to Jacob Zuma, when we were having a discussion, as we often did, about these things, because I was the leader of the opposition and he was the president, I'd say to him, but all of these things that happened. And he said, I did nothing wrong. I was just applying BBBEE. And when I looked at it, the law covered the whole state capture gamut under the fig leaf of BBBEE. That's what it is used for.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you have a leader that you can argue that is corrupt. So the point is, any law can be exploited, same way that any institution, like religious institutions, can be exploited. You can have good pastors, you can have bad pastors. Politicians can be bad, can be good. We've got laws in this country. Laws are also prone to exploitation. To suggest that the laws are carved so that they benefit ANC cadres is wrong. If you have an ANC in power and what they are doing is they want to bring in their own people, you can criticize that. Like you've mentioned a number of cases, you've just mentioned Baleka Mbete. I can take that. I don't know that case. But I'm saying you can make a blanket statement like that.
No, I'm afraid I can, Clement. I'm afraid.
Can't,
let me tell you why.
Unless you're able to say to me that every single multinational company.
I can't say every single one, but the general rule is.
Statement.
No, the general rule is I'm prepared to stand by that. BBBEE was introduced to ensure that ownership of companies was at least a third black owned. That on its own did not mention or imply ANC, but in effect, what happened again and again and again and again was that these companies saw their opportunity of getting into the inside track with the ANC. ANC people saw the opportunity of setting up companies and consortiums, and immediately they were in on the inside track. So if you look at Cyril Ramaphosa, how did he become a billionaire? How did he become a billionaire? Which businesses did he actually start and build up? And I can go through one after the other and show
So
to you.
I'm going to leave it there. A very interesting argument by Helen Zille to end off. And yeah, I'd really love to see Professor William Gumede's findings in detail, because I did read about his conclusion, but much like she and the host explained, he hasn't really shown any of his background research or data that he used. So I'd really love to see that. Hopefully somebody will be able to get it from him in the not too distant future. But I'm going to leave it there. The rest of the interview is really just taking questions from callers, from listeners, and Helen addressing them. Not much for me to comment on there. She did a pretty decent job of speaking to everybody about how she's going to fix Joburg. And ultimately, you can check that out if you head over to YouTube, type in Helen Zille, type in Talk 702, and you'll pretty much will be able to come across the interview. So yeah, that's going to be all from me for the meantime. I really hope that you enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please remember to subscribe to the channel and stick around for the next episode. Until then, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.